I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steaming cup of coffee in front of me. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible. John was reading the newspaper, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "John, we need to talk about Kinsley," I said, my voice trembling with frustration. He looked up, eyebrows raised, folding the newspaper neatly. "What's wrong, Ava?" "She doesn't listen to me anymore. It's like I'm invisible to her. She only listens to you, and it's driving me crazy. We used to be so close, but now I trailed off, the words catching in my throat." John sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've noticed she's been distant. But what do you want me to do about it?" "I need you to talk to her. Find out why she's acting this way. Please, John," I pleaded, my eyes welling up with tears. He nodded, placing a reassuring hand on mine. "All right, Ava. I'll talk to her tomorrow. We'll get to the bottom of this." The next morning I woke up early, determined to make things right. I made pancakes, Kinsley's favourite, hoping it would ease the tension. But when I went to wake her up, she refused to get out of bed. "Kinsley, it's time to get up. You'll be late for school," I called from the doorway. "Go away, Mum." "I'm not going with you," she muttered, pulling the covers over her head. My heart sank. "Please, Kinsley, don't do this." She finally sat up, glaring at me. I said no. "I'm going with Dad." I turned away, tears stinging my eyes. How had it come to this? Breakfast was awkward. John came down and immediately sensed the tension. He looked at Kinsley, who was poking at her pancakes. "Hey, kiddo, what's wrong?" he asked gently. "Nothing," she mumbled, not meeting his eyes. John glanced at me, then back at Kinsley. "Kinsley, your mum is worried about you. You've been really distant lately." Kinsley's fork clattered onto her plate. "She's worried about me. All she does is nag. I don't want to go to school with her. I want you to take me." I felt a sharp pang of hurt. "Kinsley, I'm your mother. Why don't you want to go with me?" She rolled her eyes. "Because you're always on my case. Dad doesn't do that." John put his hand up. "All right, let's calm down. Kinsley, I'll take you to school today. But we need to talk about this. Your mum and I just want to understand what's going on." Kinsley shrugged, clearly uninterested in the conversation. "Whatever." John gave me a sympathetic look. "I'll talk to her, Ava. We'll figure this out." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you, John." He kissed my forehead. "It'll be okay. We'll get through this." As they left for school, I stood at the window, watching them go. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. I hoped John could get through to her. Something had to change. Our family couldn't go on like this. The rest of the day dragged on. I tried to distract myself with housework, but my mind kept drifting back to the breakfast table. What had happened between Kinsley and me? We used to be so close. Was it something I did? Or didn't do? When John and Kinsley finally returned, I was in the kitchen, nervously stirring a pot of soup. John came in first, giving me a reassuring smile. Kinsley followed, her expression unreadable. John put a hand on my shoulder. "Ava, Kinsley and I talked. We're going to work on this together. She'll explain everything to you soon." Kinsley nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, Mum, we'll talk." I smiled, despite the uncertainty gnawing at my gut. "Okay, sweetie, I'm here whenever you're ready." As we sat down for dinner, the atmosphere felt lighter, though a shadow of tension still lingered. We were taking the first steps towards understanding and healing, but I knew the journey ahead would be long and challenging. Yet, for the sake of our family, it was a journey we had to undertake together. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to make things right. I decided to make Kinsley's favourite breakfast pancakes. Maybe a little comfort food would help bridge the gap that had grown between us. The smell of sizzling batter filled the kitchen, and I felt a glimmer of hope. I made my way to Kinsley's room, knocking gently on the door. Kinsley, it's time to get up. I made pancakes for you, I called softly. No response. I knocked again, a bit louder. Kinsley, come on, you'll be late for school. From inside I heard a muffled groan. Go away, Mum. I'm not going with you, she muttered, her voice thick with sleep. My heart sank, but I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Kinsley was buried under her blankets, only a tuft of her brown hair visible. Kinsley, please, don't do this. Get up and come have breakfast. She threw the covers off, glaring at me with her hazel eyes. I said no. I'm going with Dad. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. Kinsley, I'm your mother. Why don't you want to go with me? She crossed her arms defiantly. Because you're always nagging me. Dad doesn't do that. I felt a sharp pang of hurt. I'm not trying to nag, sweetie. I just want what's best for you. Kinsley rolled her eyes and flopped back onto her bed. Whatever, Mum. Just leave me alone. Fighting back tears, I turned and left the room. Downstairs, John was already at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee and reading the newspaper. He looked up as I entered, concern etched on his face. What's going on, he asked, setting his mug down. Kinsley won't get up. She refuses to go to school with me, I said, my voice breaking. John sighed and stood up. All right, I'll handle it. He walked past me and headed upstairs. I followed, lingering in the hallway as he knocked on Kinsley's door. Kinsley, it's Dad. Open up, he called out, his voice firm but gentle. After a moment, the door creaked open and Kinsley peeked out. What? John leaned against the doorframe. What's this about not wanting to go to school with your mum? Kinsley shrugged, avoiding his gaze. I just don't want to. Can you take me instead? John exchanged a glance with me over Kinsley's head. All right, I'll take you, but we need to talk about this later. Understand? She nodded, looking relieved. Okay. John turned to me. Ava, I'll take her today. We'll figure this out. I nodded, forcing a smile. Thank you, John. Downstairs, breakfast was awkward. Kinsley picked at her pancakes, not saying a word. John tried to make small talk, but it was clear she wasn't interested. Finally, it was time to leave. John grabbed his keys and turned to Kinsley. Ready to go, kiddo? She nodded, grabbing her backpack. Yeah. As they walked out the door, John glanced back at me. We'll talk tonight, okay? Okay, I said, my heart heavy with worry. The rest of the day felt endless. I couldn't focus on anything, my mind constantly drifting back to Kinsley. What had happened to my sweet little girl? Was it something I did? Or was it just a phase? When John and Kinsley finally returned home, I was in the kitchen, nervously stirring a pot of soup. John came in first, giving me a reassuring smile. Kinsley followed, her expression unreadable. John put a hand on my shoulder. Ava, Kinsley and I talked. We're going to work on this together. She'll explain everything to you soon. Kinsley nodded reluctantly. Yeah, Mum, we'll talk. I smiled, despite the uncertainty gnawing at my gut. Okay, sweetie, I'm here whenever you're ready. As we sat down for dinner, the atmosphere felt lighter, though a shadow of tension still lingered. We were taking the first steps towards understanding and healing, but I knew the journey ahead would be long and challenging. Yet, for the sake of our family, it was a journey we had to undertake together. John was true to his word. He took Kinsley to school that morning, determined to find out what was going on. I watched them leave, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. I hoped he could get through to her. Later that day, John picked her up from school. They decided to go to a nearby café, a place they both liked. Over hot chocolate and cookies, John gently probed, trying to understand what had caused the rift between Kinsley and me. All right, Kinsley, John began, taking a sip of his coffee. We need to talk about what's been going on between you and your mum. Can you tell me why you're so upset with her? Kinsley hesitated, looking down at her hot chocolate. She stirred it with her spoon, clearly unsure of how to start. Kinsley, whatever it is, you can tell me. I'm here to help, John said, his voice calm and reassuring. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. Okay, Dad, I'll tell you. But you have to promise me something first. John raised an eyebrow, curious. Promise you what? You have to promise to get me a new phone, she said, her voice firm. John blinked in surprise. A new phone? Why do you need a new phone? Just promise, Dad. Please, she insisted, her eyes pleading. John sighed, realizing she was serious. All right, Kinsley. I promise. Now, can you please tell me what's going on? She took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Mum's been lying to you, Dad. I saw her kissing Nova's dad. John felt like the ground had been pulled from under him. He stared at Kinsley, unable to comprehend what she had just said. Kinsley, are you sure? That's a serious accusation. I'm sure, Dad. I saw them with my own eyes. Twice, she insisted, her voice unwavering. John leaned back, processing the information. We need to talk to your mum about this. But first, let's get you that phone. Kinsley smiled weakly, the weight of her revelation still hanging heavy in the air. Thanks, Dad. After their café visit, John drove Kinsley to the electronics store. He watched as she picked out a new phone, her mood lifting slightly. Once they were back in the car, he turned to her. Kinsley, I need you to tell me everything. When did you see this happen? She nodded, looking serious. The first time was last week. I finished school early and went to Nova's house. Mum was supposed to pick me up, but she called and said she was running late. I saw her car outside, and when I looked out the window I saw Nova's dad get in. They were talking, and then they kissed. John clenched the steering wheel, trying to stay calm. And the second time. It was at our house. Remember when Nova and her mum came over for dinner? I went to get something from the kitchen and saw Mum and Nova's dad there. They were holding hands and whispering. Then they kissed again, she said, her voice breaking slightly. John took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak. Kinsley, thank you for telling me. This isn't easy, but we'll get through it. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I just don't understand why she would do this, Dad. Why? John reached over and hugged her. I don't know, Kinsley, but we'll find out. I promise. When they got home, John found me in the kitchen, preparing dinner. He gave me a look that told me everything. I felt a lump in my throat as I realized the moment of truth had arrived. Ava, we need to talk, John said, his voice unusually stern. I nodded, my heart pounding. What's going on? Kinsley told me something today. She said she saw you kissing Nova's dad. Is it true, he asked, his eyes boring into mine. My heart stopped. The room spun around me. John, it's not what you think. Kinsley stood behind John, her eyes full of hurt and anger. Mom, how could you? I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. It meant nothing. Meant nothing. You betrayed our family, Ava. How could you? John's voice cracked, his pain evident. I'm sorry, John. I never wanted to hurt you or Kinsley, I said, tears streaming down my face. Kinsley stepped forward, her expression resolute. I don't want to live with you anymore, Mum. I want to stay with Dad. The weight of her words crushed me. I realized the gravity of my actions and the pain I had caused. This was the beginning of a difficult journey, one where we would have to face the consequences of my mistakes and find a way to heal as a family. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was heavy with tension. I could hardly sleep the night before, and it showed. My eyes were puffy, and my head throbbed. John was already up, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. He looked tired and worn out. "Morning," I said quietly, not sure how to start the conversation. "Morning," he replied without looking up from his cup. Kinsley was still upstairs, getting ready for school. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing how much I had hurt her. I needed to talk to John, but I didn't know where to begin. John finally broke the silence. "Ava, we need to figure out what we're going to do. Kinsley is devastated, and I'm just trying to make sense of all this." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I know, John. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "Why, Ava? Why did you do it?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I was lonely, John. You've been so busy with work, and I felt neglected. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. It meant nothing." John shook his head. "It meant something, Ava. It meant something to me and to Kinsley. You broke our trust." Before I could respond, Kinsley walked into the kitchen. She glanced at us, then quickly looked away, focusing on her cereal. The silence was deafening. "Kinsley," John began gently, "your mum and I need to talk to you." She looked up, her eyes wary. "About what?" "About what you saw," John said, his voice steady. "Your mum and I want to explain." Kinsley set her spoon down, her expression hardening. "I don't want to hear it. I don't care." "Kinsley, please," I pleaded. "Just listen." She crossed her arms, clearly reluctant, but willing to give us a chance. "Fine. What do you want to say?" I took a deep breath. "Kinsley, what you saw was a mistake. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm so sorry. It didn't mean anything. I was feeling lonely and made a bad decision." Kinsley's eyes filled with tears. "But why, Mum? Why would you do that to Dad? To us?" "I don't have a good answer, sweetie," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I was feeling neglected and made a horrible choice. But I promise you, it's over. It won't happen again." John stepped in. "Kinsley, your mum and I are trying to work through this. It's going to be hard, but we want to do what's best for you. We're going to need some time and space to figure things out." Kinsley nodded slowly. "Okay, but it still hurts. I don't know if I can forgive you, Mum." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. "I understand, Kinsley. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I love you so much." She wiped her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you too, Mum. But it's going to take time." John looked at both of us, his expression resolute. "We'll take it one day at a time. For now, let's focus on getting through today." We finished breakfast in silence, each lost in our thoughts. John took Kinsley to school, promising to pick her up later for another talk. I stayed home, trying to figure out how to mend the pieces of our shattered family. Later that evening, John and Kinsley returned home. The atmosphere was tense, but slightly better than the morning. We decided to have dinner together, hoping to create some sense of normalcy. As we sat down to eat, Kinsley spoke up. "So what happens now?" John and I exchanged a glance. "We're going to work on this," he said. "We're going to get through it together. It's going to be hard, but we'll figure it out." Kinsley nodded, a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Okay, I'll try." After dinner, John and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. "John," I began, "I'm truly sorry. I know I've hurt you deeply." He sighed, looking out at the fading light. "I know, Ava. I'm hurt and angry, but I also love you. We have a lot to work through." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I promise." He took my hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll take it one day at a time. We owe that to ourselves and to Kinsley." As the darkness settled around us, I felt a small flicker of hope. We had a long road ahead, but we were taking the first steps together. No matter how difficult it would be, we were committed to rebuilding our family one day at a time. The tension in the house was palpable. After the initial shock had worn off, it was clear that we needed to address the elephant in the room. John had been distant, and Kinsley was still processing everything. We couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. It was time for a confrontation. That evening, after dinner, we gathered in the living room. John sat in his usual chair, looking weary. Kinsley curled up on the couch, clutching a pillow to her chest. I took a deep breath and sat on the edge of the coffee table, facing them both. "All right," John said, breaking the silence. "We need to talk about this. All of it." Kinsley nodded, her eyes wary. "Yeah, we do." I looked at John, then at Kinsley. "I know you both have questions, and I'm here to answer them. I'm not going to hide anything." John nodded. "Good, because I want to know everything. How did it start, Ava?" I felt a lump in my throat. It started a few months ago. I was feeling lonely and neglected. You were always busy with work, and I felt like you didn't have time for me anymore. John's eyes narrowed. "So you turned to Nova's dad?" "It wasn't planned," I said quickly. "We ran into each other at a parent-teacher conference. We started talking, and it felt nice to have someone to talk to. It was just innocent at first, but then it escalated." Kinsley's voice was small, but it cut through the room like a knife. "How could you do that, Mum? How could you kiss him?" I looked at her, my heart breaking. "I made a terrible mistake, Kinsley. I was weak and selfish. It wasn't fair to you or to your dad." John's jaw tightened. "Did you ever? Did it go further than kissing?" "No," I said firmly. "It never went beyond that. It was just 2 times, and I regretted it immediately. I ended it before it could go any further." Kinsley looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "But why didn't you tell us? Why did you keep it a secret?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I was scared, Kinsley. I didn't want to hurt you or your dad. I thought I could just forget about it and move on. But then you saw us, and everything fell apart." John leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Ava, do you still have feelings for him?" "No, John," I said, shaking my head. "It was a mistake. I love you and I want to fix this. I want to fix us." Kinsley wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Mum. It hurts too much." "I understand, sweetie," I said softly. "Trust takes time to rebuild, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn it back." John sighed, rubbing his temples. "We need to set some boundaries, Ava. If we're going to try to fix this, there need to be rules. Transparency, honesty, and no more secrets." I nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. I'll do anything. I want to make things right." Kinsley looked at her dad. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," John said, looking at me, "that Ava and I will go to counselling. As a family, we'll work through this together. And Ava, you need to cut off all contact with Nova's dad. Completely." "Done," I said immediately. "I've already told him it's over. I won't see or talk to him again." Kinsley took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "And what about us, Dad? What about you and me?" John's expression softened as he looked at our daughter. "Kinsley, I'm here for you. We'll get through this together. I promise." There was a long silence as we all absorbed the weight of his words. Finally, Kinsley spoke. "I'm willing to try," she said quietly, "but it's going to take time." "I know," I said, my voice trembling, "and I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. I love you both so much." John stood up, crossing the room to sit beside Kinsley. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "We're a family," he said firmly, "and we'll get through this, one step at a time." I watched them, feeling a mix of hope and guilt. This was just the beginning, and we had a long road ahead. But for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a glimmer of hope. We were taking the first steps toward healing, and we were doing it together. The days that followed our confrontation were a whirlwind of emotions and strained conversations. John and I had decided to go to counselling, and Kinsley was starting to open up, but the air in the house was still thick with tension. One evening, after another silent dinner, John and I sat in the living room, trying to watch a movie. Kinsley had gone to her room, clearly wanting to be alone. I could feel the weight of unspoken words between us. "John," I said, breaking the silence, "can we talk?" He muted the TV and turned to me, his eyes tired. "Yeah, what's on your mind?" I feel like we're drifting further apart. Counselling is helping, but I still feel like there's this huge gap between us," I admitted, my voice trembling. John sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Ava, it's going to take time. Trust was broken, and it's not something we can fix overnight. I'm trying, but it's hard." "I know, and I'm sorry," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "I just miss us. I miss the way we used to be." John looked at me, his expression softening. "I miss us too, Ava, but we need to be patient. We have to rebuild from the ground up." Later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft knock on the door. Kinsley peeked in, looking hesitant. "Mum, can I come in?" "Of course, sweetie," I said, sitting up. "What's on your mind?" She sat down on the edge of the bed, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I'm still really hurt, but I want to try to understand." I reached out and took her hand. "I'm so glad you're willing to talk, Kinsley. What do you want to know?" "Why didn't you come to me or Dad when you were feeling lonely? Why did you go to someone else?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I should have come to you and your dad," I admitted. "I felt isolated, and instead of talking to you both, I made a terrible decision. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I was wrong." Kinsley nodded slowly. "I just wish you had told us. We could have helped." "I know, and I regret it every day," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Kinsley. I never wanted to hurt you." She squeezed my hand. "I believe you, Mum. It's just going to take time to heal." A few days later, John and I had our first counselling session. The therapist, Dr. Harris, was a calm, patient woman who made us feel comfortable immediately. "John, Ava, it's clear you both want to work through this," she began, "but it's important to understand that healing is a process. Today, I want to focus on communication and rebuilding trust." John nodded. "We've been trying to talk more, but it's hard." "It's understandable, Doctor," Harris said. "Ava, how have you been feeling?" "I feel guilty and scared," I admitted. "I'm afraid I've ruined everything." "Doctor," Harris leaned forward. "Acknowledging your feelings is a good first step. John, how do you feel about what Ava just said?" John looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "I appreciate that you're being honest. I'm hurt and angry, but I still love you. I want to move forward, but I need to see consistent effort from both of us." "I promise I'm committed to this," I said, tears in my eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes." At home, the atmosphere was slowly starting to change. There were still moments of tension, but there were also glimpses of hope. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Kinsley spoke up. "Dad, Mum, I've been thinking, maybe we could do something fun together this weekend, like we used to." John and I exchanged a hopeful glance. "That sounds like a great idea," Kinsley, John said. "What do you have in mind?" Kinsley smiled for the first time in days. "Maybe we could go to the park and have a picnic, just the three of us." "I'd love that," I said, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "Let's do it." The weekend came, and we packed a picnic basket with all our favourite foods. At the park, we found a nice spot under a big oak tree. The sun was shining, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we were all genuinely happy. As we ate, we talked and laughed, sharing stories and memories. Kinsley seemed more at ease, and John and I felt a renewed sense of connection. "Mum, Dad," Kinsley said, looking at both of us. I know it's going to take time, but I think we're going to be okay. John reached over and squeezed my hand. I think so too, Kinsley. We're going to be okay. As we sat there, surrounded by the beauty of the park and the love of our family, I felt a sense of hope and gratitude. The road ahead was still long and challenging, but we were taking the steps to heal together. And that was all that mattered. The picnic at the park was a small but significant step forward for our family. We returned home that evening feeling a sense of relief, like we had finally broken through some of the tension. But we all knew that the real work was just beginning. The next few weeks were filled with counselling sessions, difficult conversations, and a lot of patience. One evening after a particularly intense session with Dr. Harris, John and I sat on the porch, sipping tea and reflecting on everything. Ava, I've been thinking, John began, staring out into the yard, about everything we've been through and how far we still have to go. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Me too. It's been hard, but I think we're making progress. Don't you? He turned to look at me, his expression softer than it had been in weeks. Yeah, I think we are. It's just, some days it feels like one step forward and two steps back. I know, I said quietly, but I'm committed to this, John, to us. I'm not going to give up. He reached over and took my hand. I'm not giving up either. We owe it to ourselves and to Kinsley. Kinsley had been making an effort too. She was talking more openly, and while there were still moments of hurt and anger, she seemed to be slowly finding her way back to us. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, she came into the kitchen. Hey, Mum, she said, leaning against the counter. Hey, sweetie. How was school? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. It was okay. I wanted to talk to you about something, she said, her voice serious. I turned to face her, giving her my full attention. Of course. What's on your mind? She took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I know it's going to take time, but I want us to be close again. I miss how things used to be. My heart ached at her words. I miss it too, Kinsley. I'm so sorry for everything I put you through. I promise I'm doing everything I can to make things right. She nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and sadness. I know you are, and I appreciate it. I just need you to be patient with me, okay? Of course, sweetie, I said, pulling her into a hug. We'll take it one day at a time. The next few days felt like a cautious dance. John and I were more open with each other, sharing our feelings and fears. We made a point to spend time together, just the two of us, to reconnect and rebuild our relationship. One evening, after Kinsley had gone to bed, John and I sat in the living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls. Ava, John began, his voice hesitant. There's something I've been meaning to ask you. Anything, I said, feeling a pang of anxiety. Why didn't you tell me you were feeling lonely? I mean, really tell me, he asked, his eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I guess I didn't want to burden you. You were always so busy with work, and I didn't want to add to your stress. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I was wrong. John nodded slowly. I wish you had told me. I would have made time for you, for us. I know that now, I said softly. I'm learning to ask for help, to communicate better. It's something we both need to work on. He reached out and took my hand. We'll get there, Ava. Together. A few weeks later, we had a family meeting. We sat around the kitchen table, the place where so many difficult conversations had taken place recently. Okay, John said, looking at both Kinsley and me. We've made a lot of progress, but we need to keep working on this. How do you both feel about where we are right now? Kinsley was the first to speak. I feel better. It's still hard, but I think we're getting there. I just need us to keep being honest with each other. I nodded in agreement. I feel the same. I think we're on the right path, but we need to keep talking, keep working through this together. John smiled. A rare sight these days. I agree. We're stronger together, and we'll get through this. One day at a time. That weekend, we decided to take a short trip to the mountains. It was something we used to do often, and it felt like a good way to reconnect as a family. The fresh air, the beautiful scenery, and the time away from everyday stress worked wonders. As we hiked along a trail, Kinsley ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the trees. John and I walked behind her, hand in hand, enjoying the moment. "This was a great idea," John said, squeezing my hand. "It really was," I agreed. "We needed this." Kinsley turned back to us, her face glowing with happiness. "Come on, slowpokes. The view up here is amazing." We hurried to catch up with her, and when we reached the top of the trail, the view took our breath away. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start for our family. As we stood there, taking in the beauty around us, I felt a sense of peace. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time I felt hopeful. We were healing, one step at a time, and we were doing it together. The aftermath of my mistakes had brought us to the brink, but it had also shown us how strong we could be when we faced our challenges head-on, and for that I was grateful. The trip to the mountains had been a breath of fresh air, but we knew the real work of rebuilding our family continued once we returned home. Our routines slowly regained a semblance of normalcy, but the underlying tension remained. We were all trying, but some days were harder than others. One evening, after a particularly rough day at work, John came home looking exhausted. Kinsley was doing her homework at the kitchen table, and I was preparing dinner. I could tell from his expression that he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Hey, how was your day?" I asked, trying to sound upbeat. "Long," he replied, dropping his bag by the door and rubbing his temples. "Really long." Kinsley looked up from her homework, sensing the tension. "Dad, are you okay?" John forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." "Why don't you go relax for a bit? Dinner will be ready soon," I suggested. He nodded and headed to the living room, sinking into the couch. I glanced at Kinsley, who looked worried. "Mum, is Dad going to be okay?" she asked softly. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He's just tired, sweetie. We all have days like this. Why don't you take a break and go talk to him? I think he could use some company." Kinsley nodded and put her homework aside. She walked into the living room and sat down next to John. "Hey, Dad," she said quietly. "Want to talk about it?" John looked at her, surprised. "You know, sometimes it helps just having you here. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot about us. About everything that's happened," Kinsley began, choosing her words carefully. "I want us to be okay again. I know it's going to take time, but I think we're getting there." John smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You know what, Kinsley? I think you're right. We are getting there." Slowly but surely. Dinner that night was a little lighter, the tension easing just a bit. We laughed and shared stories, and for the first time in a while, it felt like we were a normal family again. After dinner, we decided to play a board game, something we used to do often but had neglected in recent months. As we set up the game, Kinsley looked at both of us. "I've missed this," she said simply. "Me too," John agreed, smiling at her. "Let's make a point to do this more often." We played for hours, laughing and teasing each other. It felt like a turning point, a moment where we all realized that despite everything, we still had each other. And that was enough. The next day, I had a session with Dr. Harris alone. She had suggested individual sessions in addition to our family ones to help us work through our personal feelings. "How are things at home?" she asked, her voice calm and encouraging. "Better," I said, feeling a sense of relief. "We had a really good night last night. We talked, we played a game together." It felt normal. Dr. Harris nodded. "That's great to hear. These moments of normalcy are important. They help rebuild the trust and connection that was lost. I know we still have a long way to go, but it feels like we're on the right path, I said, my voice hopeful. Remember, it's a journey, Doctor, Harris said gently. There will be setbacks, but it's how you handle them that matters. A few days later, John and I had another counselling session together. This time, Dr. Harris focused on our communication. John, Ava, one of the key aspects of rebuilding your relationship is learning to communicate openly and honestly, she said. Let's practice that today. John turned to me, taking a deep breath. Ava, I want you to know that I'm still hurt and angry about what happened, but I also know that I love you, and I want to move forward. I need you to be honest with me about your feelings, even if they're difficult. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I understand, John. I'm committed to being open and honest. I still feel a lot of guilt and shame, but I'm working through it. I love you, and I want us to heal together. Doctor. Harris smiled. That's a great start. Keep practicing this at home. Make time for these conversations, even if they're hard. Back at home, we continued to make small but significant strides. One evening, while we were all watching a movie, Kinsley suddenly spoke up. Mum, Dad, I want to say something. We paused the movie and turned to her, giving her our full attention. I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness, she began, her voice steady. I know it's not something that happens overnight, but I want you both to know that I'm trying. I want to forgive and move forward, but I need us to keep talking and being honest with each other. John reached over and squeezed her hand. We're in this together, Kinsley. We'll keep talking and working through it. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I'm so proud of you, Kinsley, and I'm so grateful for both of you. We're stronger together. As we resumed the movie, I felt a sense of peace settle over us. It wasn't going to be easy and there would still be challenges ahead, but we were moving in the right direction. This was our turning point. We were learning to navigate the aftermath of my mistakes with grace and resilience, and we were doing it together as a family. The road ahead was long, but with each step we were healing and growing stronger. And that was all that mattered. A year had passed since that fateful day when everything came crashing down. As I stood in our newly renovated kitchen, I reflected on how far we had come. The journey had been long and challenging, but we had emerged stronger and more connected than ever before. John walked in, a contented smile on his face. Morning, Ava. Coffee's ready. Just brewed a fresh pot, I said, pouring us each a cup. Can you believe it's been a year? He took the cup from me, his hand lingering on mine for a moment. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. But look at us now. We've come a long way. Kinsley bounded down the stairs, her energy infectious. Morning, Mum. Morning, Dad. Are we still going to the park later? Absolutely, John said, ruffling her hair. It's our new tradition, remember? Kinsley grinned. I know. I can't wait. It's going to be so much fun. At the park, we set up our picnic under the same big oak tree where we had shared that pivotal moment months ago. The sun was shining, and there was a gentle breeze. It felt like the perfect day to celebrate our new beginning. As we ate, we talked and laughed, sharing memories and making plans for the future. Kinsley was more vibrant and happy than I had seen her in a long time. It was clear that the healing process had been effective for all of us. Remember that time we got lost hiking and ended up walking an extra 2 miles, Kinsley said, giggling. John chuckled. How could I forget? Your mum and I were so tired, but you kept going like it was nothing. I thought it was an adventure, Kinsley said, smiling. And it was one of the best days ever. I looked at John and Kinsley, my heart swelling with love and gratitude. I'm so proud of us. We've been through so much, but we've come out stronger. John nodded, taking my hand. We've learned to communicate, to be honest with each other, and to support one another. That's what family is all about. Kinsley's eyes sparkled with tears. I love you guys so much. I'm so glad we're all okay. We love you too, sweetie, I said, pulling her into a hug. More than you'll ever know. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the park, we packed up our picnic and started to head home. On the way back, Kinsley walked between us, holding both our hands. "Can we keep doing this?" she asked. "Having picnics, spending time together like this." "Of course," John said. "It's our new tradition, remember? We're in this together, always." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "And we'll keep making new memories, building on the ones we already have." When we got home, we settled into our cozy living room, the fireplace crackling softly. Kinsley curled up with a book, and John and I sat together on the couch, reflecting on the past year. "Ava, I'm so grateful for how far we've come," John said, his voice soft. "We've worked hard, and it's paying off." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "I'm grateful too. For you, for Kinsley, for this new beginning. We've built something beautiful out of something broken." He kissed my forehead. "Here's to our new beginning. To many more years of love, laughter, and togetherness." Kinsley looked up from her book, smiling at us. "Here's to us." As we sat there, the warmth of our home surrounding us, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The road had been long and fraught with challenges, but we had faced them together. And now we were stronger, more connected, and ready for whatever the future held. Our new beginning wasn't just a fresh start, it was a testament to our resilience, our love, and our unwavering commitment to each other. And as we moved forward, I knew that we could face anything, as long as we did it together. In the end, we had found our way back to each other, not just as a family, but as individuals who had grown and healed. This was our story, and it was just beginning. The future was bright, and we were ready to embrace it with open hearts and hopeful spirits. Let us know in the comments how this story has inspired you, or share your own experiences of overcoming adversity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching stories like this one. Hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest uploads. Your journey through the complexities of the human heart starts now. Remember, your story isn't over yet. It's just a new chapter beginning. Stay strong, stay inspired.